Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional league, dynasty league, PTR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
What is up, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the one and only GSMC Podcast Network. I am your Thursday and Sunday host, Grady Duggan, and it is Sunday, July 12th, and I hope all of you are having a wonderful day. As we inch closer to the football season, it starts getting right to fantasy football draft time. A time where you gotta study up, read a little bit, figure out who you like this year, what's going on in the football world, and get into the drafts. So, as much as I hope you guys are having a wonderful day today, we have an awesome show planned, and I do not want to waste too much of your valuable time. So today I am going to be doing something I have been kind of building up towards, and I am really excited to do on the show today, and that is my first mock draft. We might get into some other stuff later in the show, but today is going to be, the big chunk of it is going to be my first fantasy football mock draft heading into the 2020 NFL season. There are a lot of variables that go into fantasy drafts, and that's why it does make it a little hard to plan, because every single league is different, whether there's 8 to 10 teams or 12 to 14 teams, the scoring, whether it's a PPR or not. So I'll explain which rulings I am going to be going with in this fantasy football draft. But the reason mock drafts can be so important is, yes, every draft is different. Never are you going to get 2 drafts in a row that are even close to being identical. But the main reason why mock drafts can be so crucial as you start preparing for fantasy football season is just because you kind of get the vibe of whether it's a computer or other live people are thinking for fantasy football this year. You're kind of getting a sense and the feel of where certain players are going. And obviously this year, a lot of special circumstances with the COVID-19 pandemic going on. So that is a little factor to take in when you are doing your mock drafts and real fantasy football drafts, but not too much once you're in the fantasy football draft. But it is a little thing to consider. So that's something I will talk about as the picks go. So this fantasy football mock draft I'm going to be doing is the mock draft through Draft Wizard with the Fantasy Pros mock draft simulator. There are a couple different websites where you can do mock drafts. ESPN is a good one. The thing I like about ESPN is you can get into a live mock draft with other people. So it's the most real situation and the most authentic and closest to what you're going to get in your real fantasy football drafts. So that is a good option to use. The reason I like this one for today is because I'm the only one in it, and it is slower. I don't have a clock when I pick, so I can sit there and I can talk you guys through the people on the board, why I would choose who I'm choosing, and then I can also have the time to kind of talk through, look at the other picks, and maybe explain my insight as to why the computer might think those players are getting drafted there. And as we get into it, we'll be able to see if they're all being drafted according to their draft number that Fantasy Pros has, but usually it is not. So it's more for this type of practice that I am doing for today's episode. I will be able to kind of walk you through the whole entire process, every player that gets picked, why they may go there, why I might agree with it or disagree with it, and just kind of a more hands-on experience as we do this mock draft. Now, eventually, I will probably do an episode with the ESPN one where it's live and I am talking through a very authentic fantasy football draft, and that will be a whole different situation. But for today, I want to be able to talk through every single pick, my picks, explain them at depth, and just give you guys a solid idea of what is going on and where I see players going and why. So let's get down to the details. I am on Draft Wizard Fantasy Pros Mock Draft Simulator, I will say again. And so now I'm going to go through their settings for this fantasy football mock draft. League type, 2020 season, not doing a dynasty. And then scoring, they have half PPR, PPR, or standard. I'm a big PPR guy personally. I think it makes fantasy football more exciting. If your league's not PPR, you're way too touchdown dependent in my mind. And it kind of doles down the league and the scoring. So my scoring for this football mock draft is going to be PPR. You can do a snake or a linear draft type. I'm going to do snake. That's what most fantasy football drafts are, so I like to keep it as real as possible. And then opponent pick logic. It has basic and advanced, but advanced you have to pay for, so it's going to be basic today. As we go through number of teams, I have play in 2 different leagues every year, and they're both 12-person leagues, so I'm going to keep it at 12. Draft position, I'm going to click randomize. I got third. Not bad, honestly. I know it sounds good because you get a top 3 player, which, not complaining, it is nice. But at the same time, you don't pick for a very long time into the second round because it snakes back and you're the third to last pick. So that's not the best, but I'll take it. Personally, you want to get kind of right smack in the middle of the round. If I'm in a 12-person league, I like to be somewhere in the kind of 5 to 8 range is a nice spot to be, but I'll take it. Third's not bad. That means I'll get some big running back or receiver. Now we're going to go to roster positions, and there's 1 QB. I like to play with 2 running backs, and then receiver, I'm going to go with 3. I know some leagues go 2 running backs, 2 receivers. My main league I play in is 3, so I'm going to go 3 receivers, 1 tight end. We play with 1 flex. I think flex is a good thing to have in fantasy football. It allows you to kind of get those. It makes the waiver wire important because you're trying to stream guys every week. So that is always good. And it's just who can draft the best depth, who can get those guys who maybe you're not expecting to have a good season, but they start producing for you and they are a great flex guy. So I think it makes it more fun. We're going to go with 1 defense/special teams team. That's just you picking the defense, but you also get special teams points if they do something good on special teams. 1 kicker and 5 bench players. Some of my leagues will give you 1 defensive player. I'm not seeing an option for that here, so we're not going to be doing that. But there is how many players. Again, this is a snake draft PPR, so let's start the draft. You have an option for pick clock, but like I said, today I want to be able to talk through the picks, so I'm going to keep the pick clock off. So let's go. Start draft, baby. Loading the draft. This is going to take a minute. Here we go. So off the board first was Saquon Barkley and Christian McCaffrey. So 2 top running backs in the league get drafted first. And one of the reasons that I am big on those 2, specifically Christian McCaffrey in fantasy football, 1, they rack up all sorts of yards on the run game, but also they're huge in their team's passing attack. So they like to throw the ball out of the backfield. And like I've said, this is a PPR draft. So in PPR, that is a huge aspect to be able to get. But with the 3rd pick, it has Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, and Ezekiel Elliott. in the top 3. They're saying recommended expert is Michael Thomas, and I don't disagree with that. Michael Thomas is a very reliable receiver, doesn't miss much. He's the number 1 guy for Drew Brees. So for me, it's going to become between him and Ezekiel Elliott. The reason I'm not going to go Alvin Kamara is just because of kind of durability. Is he going to be that number 1 back? Are they going to kind of have a running back by committee in a way? So personally, I know I've preached before, I like to try and get a top running back early on. And that's why in this draft, I'm going to lean to Ezekiel Elliott right here. So Ezekiel Elliott is my number 3 pick. Now I have to wait 19 picks until my next turn, which that's, like I was saying earlier, kind of the bad thing for a early pick, like the 3rd pick. And if we're going to go back to who was drafted, Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara went back-to-back right next after I did. Dalvin Cook went. We have Tyreek Hill early in the 2nd round. Kenyon Drake. Miles Sanders is an interesting one. He went the last pick of the 1st round, and that is a running back for the Philadelphia Eagles that a lot of people are really high on going into this year. They think he could be a top 10 performer, which is surprising because the Eagles have not been a huge run team at times in the past. So that's an interesting pick to keep an eye on. And especially Carson Wentz likes to find his running backs out of the backfield. That could be a good pick. Leonard Fournette went early in the 2nd round. Chris Godwin, you can't go wrong with him, especially now that he has Tom Brady at quarterback. Nick Chubb went right before me, as well as Josh Jacobs. Those are 2 running backs that are going to have big years, in my opinion. One thing that is surprising me in this mock draft, which I'm going to be honest with you, probably won't be the case in real life drafts, is that I am in the 2nd round, pick number 10, and Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson are still on the board. So that's probably not going to be the case in your fantasy football drafts. Those 2 QBs will go in the 1st round, which I don't disagree with. They both put up unheard of numbers for the quarterback position. But like I've said in previous episodes, I am a fan of waiting. So waiting for the quarterback, I usually try and go in the maybe 7th to 9th round. What I like to do with quarterbacks is I wait for I usually have 2 or 3 in mind that I think will have good years and be solid contributors in the fantasy football world. And I like to see when someone makes that first move for quarterback. Because once one quarterback moves, the dominoes start falling and quarterbacks start going. So I like to wait for one. And then once that goes, that's when I say, okay, I need to kind of hone in on quarterbacks and figure out where I'm going this year and what direction I'm choosing. But now we get to my 2nd pick, the 10th pick of the 2nd round, and they have Travis Kelce and George Kittle among the top choices. Also Kenny Galladay of the Detroit Lions and Mike Evans. This one, personally, Travis Kelce, George Kittle, you can't go wrong with either of them. And I think Mahomes spreads the ball around a little better than Jimmy Garoppolo does. I think Jimmy Garoppolo, there's times where he really keys in on one receiver or one guy, and George Kittle can be that guy. So that is kind of an advantage, personally, I think, that he has over Travis Kelce. I think Travis Kelce does maybe get a little more red zone targets, so that is one thing to pay attention to. But personally, I think the receiving core, yes, the Chiefs have Tyreek Hill, but I think the total receiving core in San Francisco is a little underrated and probably a little better than the Chiefs. I think Deebo Samuel is going to come on in his 2nd year and be an absolute monster. And then Brandon Ayuk, I've talked about, I am high on. I think he could be a Rookie of the Year candidate if he plays well and stays healthy. So for this my 2nd round pick, the number 10 pick in the 2nd round, I'm going to go George Kittle. I think the Niners have a lot of upside. I think that offense is just starting to find its groove in Kyle Shanahan's system. So I'm going to go George Kittle with my 2nd pick. So that makes it Ezekiel Elliott and George Kittle. Now, since I was later in the 2nd round, now my 3rd round pick is early. And as I was saying that, I almost jinxed it. Patrick Mahomes went the pick before me. Now, I have George Kittle and Ezekiel Elliott, no receivers yet, and the top two people on the board are DJ Moore and Juju Smith-Schuster, and that third guy is Lamar Jackson. So now it's a little bit of decision time. Obviously, in a real fantasy football draft, I'm not going to have this much time to think. I purposely did that so I could talk you guys through my picks and my thoughts. And this is a tough one, you know? Juju Smith-Schuster and DJ Moore could have huge years. Juju Smith-Schuster had a huge 2018, then quarterback issues in Pittsburgh made his 2019 not that good. And now DJ Moore for the Carolina Panthers really came on last year, had a good season, and I think he's going to be really good with Teddy Bridgewater as Matt Rule's new system is implemented, a kind of an air raid. So it works out to DJ Moore's favor. And honestly, I know I preach QB late and just wait. But I think here, I don't think in the third round, the value you get out of Lamar Jackson, I don't think I can pass that up. Right here, it has projected 2020 numbers. Juju Smith-Schuster is 233. DJ Moore is 232. Lamar Jackson is 352. Obviously, position is different. So obviously, QB scores are going to be a little higher, but the aspects that Lamar Jackson gives you on his legs as well. I mean, he threw for over 3,000 yards last year with 36 touchdowns and then rushed for over 1,200 yards. So you get that kind of running back value out of it. And in the third round, I think that is too good to pass up. I am going Lamar Jackson in the third round. So that's Ezekiel Elliott, George Kittle, and Lamar Jackson. And gosh, if this was a real life draft, I would not be upset. But I'm going to be realistic and say that Lamar Jackson probably won't be on the board in round 3, unfortunately. So that's one thing. As mock drafts are a great tool to prepare, but you do have to take that into consideration that some things are a little unrealistic. People in real life are going to value certain players a lot higher. So that is one thing to take into consideration when you're going into your mock draft. So, as I've said, Lamar Jackson, George Kittle, and Ezekiel Elliott. Now, in my opinion, it is time for a receiver. I think receivers are one of the most important positions in fantasy football, especially in a PPR league, points per reception. That is a position that is going to rack up points for you. So as I look, they have Le'Veon Bell, but I'm not too high on Le'Veon Bell this year. He's going to be a focal point in the Jets offense, but I don't think we're ever going to see the production we saw when he was really in his prime at the Pittsburgh Steelers. So there's Keenan Allen, Courtland Sutton, and Tyler Lockett. This one, Keenan Allen is a great receiver, but with their quarterback situation being a little iffy, there's just he sometimes doesn't stay healthy. That's a big thing for me. I'm going to make this pick between Courtland Sutton and Tyler Lockett. Now, Tyler Lockett is a very solid receiver. The thing is, which it's funny, it's going to sound like a knock when I say this, but this is not a knock on Tyler Lockett, is the quarterback, Russell Wilson, spreads the ball around better than almost anyone in the league. He and Aaron Rodgers are the two, they're facilitators in the pocket. It's remarkable what they do. And so that's kind of why Tyler Lockett, I'm high on him because he obviously is going to get the ball a lot. It's a dependable, great relationship he has with Russell Wilson. But I think Courtland Sutton is a young, emerging star in this league. So I'm leaning towards him right now. The fourth round is a little early to make a pick like that and kind of bank on upside. But I think Drew Lock showed he has an electric arm, showed he could be really good in the NFL. So here, I'm going to go Courtland Sutton over Tyler Lockett. Call me crazy. This is why mock drafts are good. You can kind of feel out what you want to do in certain situations. So that's what I am going to do. I went Courtland Sutton over Tyler Lockett, and now I have the third pick in the 5th round. So as I look at my roster, as I make my 5th pick, QB is settled. One wide receiver. My tight end position is settled. So this is really coming between a running back and receiver, if we're being honest. And what this is showing me is Devontae Parker, James Conner, Terry McLaurin, and DJ Chark. Honestly, I'm not super high on some of these guys, but I don't have a choice. These are the people these are the suggestions they're going. So I could take a look at who else is there. So we'll say top ranked players. We have James Conner, DJ Chark. It's the same four. Now that I look at it, it's just in different order. So we're going to go back to the suggested players just to keep it simple. And, Terry McLaurin would be my first choice if we're being honest. And bye week number 8 is highlighted in red. And as I look at my team, it is because Lamar Jackson and Courtland Sutton have the same bye week. So that means I would be drafting 3 players into the same bye week. I don't pay super close attention to that. That doesn't honestly bother me that much. You have 5 bench spots in this draft, so you have spots to take it up. And honestly, I've been one in the past to sometimes enjoy just putting heavy bye weeks all in one week. You kind of not necessarily take a loss, but you take a loss and that's okay. You just get it all out of the way. So it's one thing to take into consideration. I wouldn't harp on the bye weeks too much. Sometimes you don't even take a loss that week. Things can go your way, and then it just is a double whammy, best scenario possible. So for this one, I'm going to go between DJ Chark and Terry McLaurin. And honestly, I'm going to go with the Washington Redskins receiver, Terry McLaurin, even though he's going to go be my 3rd player on a week 8 bye. Both the quarterback situations on these teams is a little scary, but it was not that great for the Redskins last year. Well, who knows if they're the Redskins for Washington last year. And McLaurin still performed. He still did very well. It shows his worst ranking for receiver is 72, but his best could be the 16th best receiver Draft Wizards thinks. So a lot of upside in McLaurin, and that's who I'm going to go with for my 5th pick. So now in my first picks of this mock draft, I got Lamar Jackson, Ezekiel Elliott, Courtland Sutton, Terry McLaurin, and George Kittle. Not a bad go for the first mock draft of this 2020 fantasy football season. So stick around after the break. We are going to continue this mock draft.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Alrighty, GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast listeners, thank you for sticking around as I go through my first mock draft as we get closer to the 2020 NFL season. I haven't had a bad draft so far. I'm pretty pleased with the players that I have received. I mean, that is, mock drafts might take you a little bit better of a team than you're used to getting in real life, but that's okay for this exercise. That is a-okay. That's fine. So let's get back to it. So we are in the 6th round of the fantasy football draft. Just to give you a little recap of who is going before me in this round so you kind of know where it is. Austin Hooper went in this round, which is a good tight end pick. I think he will be big for the Cleveland Browns. You have Dak Prescott and Russell Wilson, who both went back-to-back picks in this mock draft. Those are 2 valuable fantasy football quarterbacks, especially Russell Wilson. I mean, it's obvious. He's been a top 5 quarterback for years on end. And he's one of the best things about Russell Wilson is he can extend any play, and he doesn't look to run. He stays behind that line of scrimmage and tries to get the ball downfield. He'll run if he has to. Don't get me wrong. Russell Wilson can move, but he looks for his receivers and tries to add on those extra yards. Dak Prescott kind of has a similar thing. He can move around in the pocket if he needs to. So both those quarterbacks, I understand why they would go in the about 6th round range. That's pretty good value for both of those guys. You have Jarvis Landry going after them and Brandon Cooks. So 2 good receivers, especially Brandon Cooks. Now that DeAndre Hopkins is not on the Texans anymore and they got Cooks, he could be that number 1 guy. They do have Will Fuller, but he hasn't been that dependable, to be honest, in his career so far. He gets hurt a solid amount. So I would also go Brandon Cooks over Will Fuller in the 6th round. So now we go back to my roster: Lamar Jackson, Ezekiel Elliott, Cortland Sutton, I'm sorry about that, and Terry McLaurin. So pretty much it's, do I want to get a wide receiver or running back in this round? And so the top 2 players are Michael Gallup and Mark Ingram here. And like Lamar Jackson, Mark Ingram also has a week 8 bye. So that would be 4 players on a week 8 bye. And I don't think I would go Mark Ingram here anyway. I think that's a good pick, but I did talk about buys where it's good to stack, and I do agree with that. But if you look at that, that would be 4 players on a week 8 bye, and that means you have no bench spaces to pick up some players and really move around on the waiver wire and fill the full roster. So 3 would probably be where I draw the limit in drafting the same bye week, because 4 is just a little bit overkill in my eyes. So the 2 receivers this pick is going to come down to is Marvin Jones and Michael Gallup. And, that is an interesting one because Michael Gallup has a lot of upside. The thing with Gallup is he's had good years before. He's a solid receiver, but they have Amari Cooper, obviously, and they just drafted CeeDee Lamb. I'm not as high on CeeDee Lamb as some draft experts are, and people around the league have been buzzing about him, but he's going to get every opportunity he can to be that number 2 or even 1 guy in that offense. I mean, maybe not number 1 because they have Amari Cooper, but he's going to get every opportunity he can to showcase why he was their first-round pick. So Michael Gallup kind of rolls the dice a little bit. And with Marvin Jones, big upside with the Detroit Lions offense. Matthew Stafford, in my opinion, is a top 5 to 8 quarterback, especially in fantasy. They throw the ball a lot in Detroit, and he has dependable receivers in Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay. So on this pick, it's out of these 4 that they've listed: Michael Gallup, Mark Ingram, David Montgomery, and Marvin Jones. Marvin Jones is the least percentage agreed with. So the so-called experts, he's the least person that they would tell me to draft here. But to be honest, I'm going to go Marvin Jones. He's a red zone target. He's a great, dependable receiver for the Detroit Lions. Didn't get hurt last year. And that's a competitive division that sometimes they're going to be often either playing from behind or in close games. If you go back to the Detroit Lions schedule, over half of their losses were 1-score games. So it's not like they're just running the ball down people's throats in the 4th quarter. They're still in the game being competitive and throwing the ball. So I think that's going to play into Marvin Jones's advantage, and I'm going to draft him. So that rounds out my receiving core with Cortland Sutton, Terry McLaurin, and Marvin Jones. Kind of a young, Marvin Jones isn't young, but the other 2 are an interesting receiver core. I'm not going to lie. So I just went 3. Now I am in the 7th round, the 3rd pick. Deebo Samuel and Will Fuller went in front of me. That bums me out. I would have loved to get Deebo Samuel, even though my receiving core is full. So Kyler Murray was also a quarterback taken in the last pick of the 6th round. I think that's a good value for him. He's got a lot of upside this year. He showed that with his rookie year, and I think he could really take a huge leap as he gears up for his 2nd season in the NFL. Now, this pick is a little interesting. You go to my roster, and I have Ezekiel Elliott as the only running back. Now I have Mark Ingram, and I just said last pick that I don't know if I would get him because of the bye week. and now he's still here on the board. So it would be naive of me not to at least look at the consideration. So the plus side of getting a guy like Mark Ingram here, even though it would kind of forfeit that week 8 already more than I already have, but he's a productive running back. That means I would have Lamar Jackson and Mark Ingram, so pretty much anything that goes on in that offense is going towards me, which isn't the worst thing. That's a good offense to be on. David Montgomery, that's the other running back they have here, and I was very high on him last year, and then he fell into the running back by committee trap, which I have talked about in past episodes, and that is a rabbit hole that I don't know if I want to go down again. If he's going to be that number one guy, he could be very good in the Chicago Bears offense. But if he's not, it's a kind of a dice roll. Another player they have at the bottom of the list is Raheem Mostert of the Niners. And obviously, this is a mock draft that is 2 months away from the season starting, but if anyone's been following the NFL news, Raheem Mostert just requested a trade from San Francisco because they don't want to pay him more. An interesting situation that we can get into a little bit because he just signed a contract last year. So now the second half of his season, he had played very well and played above his contract, yes. But now he's asking for a second contract pretty much in the same year, and hasn't even played out a bit of his contract. And Kyle Shanahan is known for finding value in running backs. So he's trying to cash in on that second half of his season. Can't blame him, but I don't know if another team is going to pay him how he wants to pay him, especially when who knows if they're going to be able to get him to produce like Kyle Shanahan did. Shanahan is known for that type of production out of smaller running backs. So who knows if they'll be able to get a trade for him. I personally don't see the Niners budging on that topic. So I do think Raheem Mostert stays, but there's that iffy, maybe he doesn't. So Raheem Mostert, maybe when it gets closer to the season, there'll be a much more concrete answer on that. But for right now, looking at what's going on, I'm not going to take that risk because I don't trust him on any other team but the Niners. And it's just too big of a question mark. What team's he going to be on? How are they going to be able to use him? I mean, this is a guy who had been on 6 teams before he had this good year with the Niners last year. So really don't think it's worth it. So between Mark Ingram and David Montgomery, I want to go Mark Ingram, but everything is telling me to go David Montgomery. He has a huge upside, to be honest, huge upside. And I think Nick Foles being the starting quarterback in Chicago now, that's going to give that offense a huge boost. It's going to keep them on the field a lot more than they were with Mitchell Trubisky. Let's be honest, Mitchell Trubisky has not played up to his second overall pick in the 2018 draft, I believe, or 2017, one or the other. So this is one I'm kind of going back and forth with. And again, I've just talked for 2 minutes. In fantasy football draft, I'm not going to have that much time. You're going to have to be much quicker on your feet and know what to do. So that's one thing I do want to stress on is you're obviously not going to have this time to teeter-totter back and forth. But because of that week 8 bye, I don't want to stack 4 players on the same spot. I'm going to go David Montgomery. That's a good pick. A lot of upside here. He could be a real surprise running back pick. So with the 75th overall pick, I chose David Montgomery. Now, as we get going, we are in the 8th round, the 10th pick of the 8th round. To give you a little bit of who has been drafted in front of me, we see a Tom Brady and Carson Wentz in the 8th round. Not bad for them. Anthony Miller of the Chicago Bears. Wow, Ingram stayed on the board until the 5th pick in the 8th round. That's a little surprising. DeAndre Swift went. I think that could be a huge sleeper pick. 2nd pick in the 8th round. That's the rookie running back for the Detroit Lions. Watch out for him this year. I think he could really surprise some people. So now I go to my roster. Everything's full. This is pretty much a slot pick. And I'm looking at it right now. It's James White, John Brown, Emmanuel Sanders, and Tariq Cohen. I'm going to tell you right off the bat, this is going to come down to James White and Emmanuel Sanders for me. This is a tough one. Emmanuel Sanders going over to New Orleans. Now, yes, they have Michael Thomas, but that's just 2 huge veterans. That's an offense. That's a passing offense with Drew Brees trying to make one last shot at a Super Bowl ring. this is a tough decision. And honestly, I want to go Emmanuel Sanders, but I think there is so much upside in James White for the New England. Yes, they do have Sony Michel, but I think Bill Belichick loves to run kind of multiple running backs at a time. James White is also huge in their pass game. They love to put him in the red zone and throw the ball to him. So double whammy right there, getting red zone passing targets for James White. Emmanuel Sanders, you can't go wrong. He's going to put up points in New Orleans. But, for this one, and this is getting into my flex position, I'm going to go James White. Who knows? I'm picked soon, so Emmanuel Sanders could still be on the board. There could be other receivers that I kind of like more. So we are going to go James White with the 94th pick in this fantasy football mock draft. And now we are in the 9th round with the 3rd overall pick. Tariq Cohen was just taken right before me. Interesting pick. 8th round in the 12th pick in the 8th round was Darius Geis, the Washington running back, someone who had high hopes coming out of LSU and has torn his ACL twice now. So it's kind of a question mark. I do not like that pick. I think he could be a secret cut, to be honest. That could be someone who is not even going to make the roster in my eyes. We'll see. I'm no coach. That's just a guess on my part. That's a crowded running back in Washington. So now as we get over to the suggested players, they have Kerryon Vaughn of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Matt Breida from the Niners, who is now on the Miami Dolphins, Mike Williams, and of course, I called it Emmanuel Sanders. And this pick's easy for me. I was just so close to picking Emmanuel Sanders. I'm high on him in New Orleans. He was great for the Niners last year, and he's just a veteran presence, dependable receiver that Drew Brees is going to be able to go to whenever he needs. And my receivers, Cortland Sutton, Terry McLaurin, and Marvin Jones. So I can always have him on the bench or as a flex with James White, kind of going back and forth. Or if David Montgomery doesn't perform, you can put James White back up to the running back position, put Montgomery on the bench, and have Emmanuel Sanders in. So that just gives my roster a lot of flexibility and something that doesn't happen every year. So you got to take advantage of that when you get those opportunities. So this is kind of a no-brainer for me. I just lucked out, and I'm going to go Emmanuel Sanders with the 99th pick in this Draft Wizard mock draft. So I hope you guys are getting some good information, some good ideas as to kind of what goes in to a fantasy football draft. An interesting tidbit right here as we get into the 10th round. I am the 10th pick in the 10th round. One of the options is Sony Michel, so I could have the whole New England Patriots backfield if I chose to, but that is not something I will do. I could also have Jordan Howard, it is telling me. So Aaron Rodgers was just picked in front of me. I think that's a great value for the 10th round. Getting a productive quarterback like that, that's pretty impressive. He landed. One thing I'm seeing is defenses have started to go off the board. Pittsburgh was picked before me. Now, let's go look at what position or what defenses are still available that would not be one of the first defenses I choose. Baltimore and New England are both still up there. That's an interesting pick to get Pittsburgh there. It doesn't look like the Niners are still there, so it doesn't look like the Pittsburgh Steelers were the first team, but that is an interesting pick. So as we go to my roster, I have everything filled. This is now getting into deeper in my bench. I already have one receiver on my bench. So if we go to the running backs, there's Tevin Coleman, who Niners now, if Raheem Mostert gets traded, Tevin Coleman could be that number one guy in a Niners offense that is going to be producing. So that's an interesting tidbit to pay attention to. You also have Latavius Murray, who will be that second back after Alvin Kamara in New Orleans. I'm going to go to the receivers, see what receivers are on the board. N'Keal Harry. Now that is an interesting one because he has a lot of upside. Didn't exactly play to his potential, but he has a lot of upside in the 2020 NFL season. But I already have one receiver on my bench, so I don't know if I want to go two receivers quite yet. I like to kind of keep it even and get a running back here if possible. So let's go back over to running back. I said Latavius Murray, Sony Michel. I already have James White. I don't want to go too heavy on the New England Patriots backfield, especially when just that whole New England Patriots offense is a big question mark. I think it could be a lot better now that they have signed Cam Newton. But without Tom Brady, it's just going to take a little bit to gel. So, I think with Raheem Mostert up in the air, Kyle Shanahan likes to go running back by committee. I think in the 10th round, a gamble on Tevin Coleman is worth it because he could have some big games. He's a dependable running back, and you already have Ezekiel Elliott and David Montgomery and James White. So you have 3 running backs. So I think a good running back like that would be an okay pick in that 10th round. So now it's going into the 11th round. I'm going to be picking early. Let's go over to suggested players in all positions. Here, I want to go receiver or tight end, and I think I'm going to go receiver. N'Keal Harry is still on the board, so that might be a little too hard to pass up. Let's go check out the tight end position. Hayden Hurst wouldn't be a bad backup. I've been high on him. I've talked about him in prior episodes. He's the new Atlanta Falcons tight end. Hayden Hurst was a first-round pick for the Baltimore Ravens, but they got Mark Andrews, who's turned into a huge stud. So it's understandable why he wouldn't exactly be there for the Baltimore Ravens. Now we go back over. This pick's going to come between N'Keal Harry and Hayden Hurst. This is a tough one, but, the value on Hayden Hurst, I'm going to go Hayden Hurst here. I've said in prior episodes that I love the concept of a 2 tight end system. If you can luck out and you get 2 tight ends that can score consistently, and George Kittle is going to be doing that, there's no question about it, and now you get Hayden Hurst too, I mean, you can't go wrong with that. And I already have 3 receivers and then a 4th on the bench with Emmanuel Sanders. So instead of N'Keal Harry, I am going to go Hayden Hurst. And great value. That was just the 123rd overall pick, and he is a average draft pick of 105. So you got some good value there. And now we are in the 12th round. I am the 10th pick in the 12th round, but let's take a little break. So here is a break coming at you, and we are going to come back and continue this mock draft. And I am going to be picking my 12th round pick.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info. Alrighty. I hope you guys enjoyed the break. We're going to get right back to it in the fantasy football mock draft. I am in round 12, pick 10 for me, and I have a pretty good roster, rounded out 2 bench spots left, and a defense and kicker position. And I have 1 tight end, 1 running back, and 1 receiver on my bench. So this is coming out to be a very balanced, well-rounded team. Now, if we go to top suggested players, just to kind of get a sense of where we're at, we have Alshon Jeffrey, could be a good pick from the Philadelphia Eagles. N'Keal Harry, surprisingly, is still on the board. I've seen videos of him working out with Cam Newton, so they're getting that chemistry going. Could be big once the season comes around. And Duke Johnson, the running back for the Houston Texans, he's going to be that number 2 guy because David Johnson is now in Houston, so not too sure on that. But we have 2 bench spots left. Let's go over to defensive
teams, see who else is there, because it's getting to that point where you kind of want a solid pick for defense. And now you get over here, you see the top two teams who are very good defenses are New England and the Buffalo Bills, the 4 and 5 overall defenses in the NFL. So I am going to stick with defense, get my defense and special teams pick here. It's just going to come down to which team. And the Buffalo Bills have a great defense. They have a secondary I am very high on, and then they have Tremaine Edmonds, a first-round linebacker a couple years back. But the New England Patriots have just too dependable and strong of a defense. They were the top 3 defense in the league last year, and their offense was not putting up points, and they were still winning games. The defense, if anyone remembers last year, their defense was scoring like crazy. So if you look at 2020 projected numbers, Buffalo Bills 107, New England 115, and in mock drafts, you can't look too much into that. You got to take that with a grain of salt, but it's something to consider as you move forward in your fantasy football draft. So for my 12th round pick, I'm going to go New England Patriots defense. They have one of the best defense in the league, and they're going to be asked to carry that team once again. So if I had positions to fill, it'd be different. I wouldn't be going defense yet. But because everything is filled and now I'm just going bench, you might as well sneak that defense in. Now you go back to the draft log. We are in the 13th round. I'm back to the top in the 3rd pick of the 13th round. Bench players. I have a balanced bench, so it's really kind of at this point, when you get this late into your fantasy drafts, you want to take dependable players, but this is the time to look around, see who is there, and go, you know what? What sleepers can I get? What guys are not valued, teams don't know about, and let's take a flyer on them, you know? There's a lot of upside in certain positions, certain players. So where is that? So we're going to look at the top running backs, see if I like anything. And Adrian Peterson in Washington, not too high on him. You have Chase Edmonds in Arizona. Wouldn't be a bad pick. He could be good. The thing with him is that's such an air raid offense. Kyler Murray, Cliff Kingsbury, and now they just have a plethora of receivers in Larry Fitzgerald, Christian Kirk, and of course DeAndre Hopkins now. So I wouldn't be too big on a Chase Edmonds pick. So let's go over to tight ends. And they have TJ Hawkinson there, Dallas Goedert. So at this point, those guys, to me, no more than streamers. It's not worth putting a 3rd tight end on the roster since I already have one on the bench. So we're going to go to wide receiver. Curtis Samuel of the Carolina Panthers and Alshon Jeffrey of the Philadelphia Eagles are the top 2 guys here. Both of them could be really good. And Paris Campbell actually is another guy. Paris Campbell you might be able to get later on in the draft. I think I'm going to go Alshon Jeffrey here. Curtis Samuel has a lot of upside in Matt Rule's spread offense, but Alshon Jeffrey has been a number 1 receiver in this league before. He's got a healthy Carson Wentz, and just the Eagles, if they're functioning fully, they are a darn good team. So that's an easy one. To have Emmanuel Sanders and Alshon Jeffrey, 2 veteran receivers like that on my bench, you can't go wrong. That is a dependable and just good thing to have in your back pocket as the fantasy football drafts proceed. So now, second to last pick, we're looking at my bench. 2 receivers, 1 running back, and a tight end. Let's go look at the running back, see if there's anything. And like I said, this is the spot where you kind of want to take a risk, because a lot of these guys, everyone's doing the same sort of thing when it gets this late. A lot of these guys are going to be there on the waiver wire if you don't pick them. So it's not like you have to get this guy here or things like that. It's kind of just a toss-up at this point in the draft. So looking at receivers, I think in this position, I already have 4 running backs. Receivers is a position I should get again. And Larry Fitzgerald is here. That is a interesting pick to be this late. James Washington is another player that's here out of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He could have a real nice year now that Ben Roethlisberger is back and healthy. I think that whole offense will take a nice step up. But to end my bench, I'm going to go Larry Fitzgerald. That's just a dependable veteran wide receiver. Now I have Alshon Jeffrey, Emmanuel Sanders, and Larry Fitzgerald. That is something that could come in handy in the middle of the season. Those are guys that people might want to trade for. You're not going to get much, most likely, unless they're having huge seasons out of the blue, which, I mean, can't go wrong with that. But just a nice, if you get a good running back or quarterback or something, that's a good tool to have. So with the 166th pick, I am going to go Larry Fitzgerald. Now, to end the draft, I'm going to fill that kicker position. Some people might want to stay late or get that top kicker position, but there's no point. So now I'm looking at the kickers, and the top three are Greg Zuerlein of the Dallas Cowboys, Robbie Gould of the San Francisco 49ers, and Matt Prater of the Detroit Lions. Now, this one, I mean, kickers, you don't want to get too complicated, but one thing I like to look at for kickers is what teams are scoring a lot and getting into the red zone. What teams, because PATs are 1 point or half a point. You get something for a PAT every time a kicker makes it. But then you also want to think about what teams are getting in the red zone and might not be finishing drives. What teams kind of stall out and have red zone troubles, because those are the kickers who are going to be getting a lot of field goal opportunities. So that is one thing to pay close attention to. And honestly, here, I think the Niners and Detroit Lions are good teams in that category or in that kind of realm of teams. So this, honestly, kickers, you don't want to get too deep into. Like I said, you kind of just go with your favorite or, like a name And for me, I was born in the Bay Area. I'm a Niner fan. I'm just going to go Robbie Gould. It gives you a little extra hunch to root for, extra little push to want for the Niners. So just picked Robbie Gould to end the draft, and 9 out of 12 in the final round were all kickers. So now that I get a draft grade. And Draft Wizards gave me an 85 out of 100 on this draft. So not too bad. Let's see. You go projected standings. They said I would get third in this league. So could be worse. I have Emmanuel Sanders. Lamar Jackson was a big one. So that was huge. Cortland Sutton was another good one that I think could really pay off. James White is a good little flex guy because the Patriots are going to be using him in the passing game as well. So Ezekiel Elliott is a solid top running back. Honestly, if this were my draft, I would be A-okay with what I came out with. There's a lot of upside on this team and just a lot of things that you could be happy about. One thing I liked that I usually don't do in fantasy football that I've talked about is the quarterback position. I like to wait until round 7 or 8 and get my position players set, get the good guys that are going to produce. But Lamar Jackson, I mean, you can't go wrong with him. You got to understand what you're getting, and you have a absolute baller, and he gives you a running back kind of value too. So I got him in the 3rd round. That's a complete steal in my eyes. And you look down, you got George Kittle too, arguably the best tight end in the league. I could have gotten Travis Kelce. Some people would disagree with my choice to go George Kittle, but I think that Jimmy Garoppolo looks to George Kittle so often that that's what gives it value. Not that Patrick Mahomes doesn't look to Kelce, but Patrick Mahomes spreads the ball out a little better than Jimmy Garoppolo does, in my opinion. And I think that kind of gives George Kittle an extra point of advantage. Another thing looking at Kittle is he's one of the most athletic players on that field every time he touches the ball. Not many tight ends can take the ball, stiff arm guys, juke guys, and take it an extra 15 to 20 yards. Obviously, he's a tight end. He doesn't have that speed that he's going to blow past the defense, but he's not going to go down easily. He runs harder than almost anyone in the NFL. So he gets the receptions, he gets the touchdowns, and he gets those yards after catch. And that is something that people don't look at enough in fantasy football. Another pick to take a look at in that fantasy draft that I had was David Montgomery, Chicago Bears running back. kind of took a gamble on that. Mark Ingram was still on the board, but that would have put me at 4 players with week 8 buys, and that just wasn't something that I wanted. I already had 3, which is almost already taken a loss, but 4, you pretty much couldn't even pick anyone up off the waiver wire to attempt to make yourself competitive in that game. So wasn't something that I wanted to do, unfortunately. So I picked David Montgomery, and here's the thing with David Montgomery. He is a beast with a ball in his hands. I don't understand why Matt Nagy did not use him more in his season last year. He kind of used him as a third down back, if that. He let Tariq Cohen get a lot of it, and their offense just didn't work that well. Let's be honest, the Chicago Bears did not have a good offense last year, but now they have Nick Foles. David Montgomery has another year in his system. I think Nick Foles, the main thing, I said it earlier, that Nick Foles will do is he will keep that team on the field longer than Mitchell Trubisky does. So, more dependable on third downs. He'll move the ball on first downs. He just gives it another crinkle to that offense that is so desperately needed for them to compete in a tough NFC North division. So that's why I picked David Montgomery, because as long as he doesn't get killed by the running back by committee and they start using him more, he could surprise some people. He really could. He is a good runner, I believe, out of Iowa State. So that is one to keep an eye out for. As we continue to kind of dissect my fantasy football mock draft, you take a look at Hayden Hurst, a tight end with a lot of upside. He's a new Atlanta Falcon, and the Falcons are, it's no secret, the Falcons love to use their tight end position very heavily in that offense. Matt Ryan the tight end position is kind of a security blanket for him. So that is something to keep an eye out for. And here's the advantage with that is Hayden Hurst could be a very dependable tight end. And tight ends are a position that are hard to hit on. So best case scenario, I already have George Kittle. You get Hayden Hurst. That's 2 tight ends in your system. I've harped on this before. If you can get a 2 tight end system and they both are productive in scoring touchdowns, because that is every quarterback loves throwing it to their tight ends. It's just a big guy in the middle of the field that catch it and get there. Get that first down, get that touchdown, anything. So if you can get 2 productive tight ends, your fantasy football team is in very, very good shape. Worst case scenario, you have George Kittle on the roster, obviously a huge hit, arguably a top 10 player in the NFL, so he's going to perform. And if Hurst doesn't quite perform in the tight end 1, tight end 2 range, the thing with that is, like I said, tight ends are a tough position to hit on. And then you have 2 that are at least quasi-productive. That's a trade piece right there. Maybe my running backs aren't producing where I like them to, or a receiver gets hurt. I did draft kind of a young receiving core. Marvin Jones is going to be a dependable receiver, which I will get to in a couple seconds or in a minute or two. But Terry McLaurin, young, with a so-so quarterback. Cortland Sutton. I think Cortland Sutton could be a number 1 receiver in this league, so that one I'm a little less worried about. But either way, if the receiving core isn't quite where I need it to be, you take Hayden Hurst as a trade chip, get a team that needs a tight end, you give him that, and try and get back maybe a wide receiver 2 or a 3, something that could maybe go into the flex position, replace Terry McLaurin if he's not performing, something like that. Anything that will help. So you got to just kind of know where your chips are falling and who you have on your roster, because that will help you in the long run for fantasy football. Now, I said I'd talk about Marvin Jones later. There's not much to talk about in a way, but just to touch on that pick, really the Detroit Lions are a pass offense. Matthew Stafford gets the ball around to all sorts of his receivers. They are a productive offense. That team was a lot better than people gave them credit for last year until Matthew Stafford got hurt. Then it was a whole different story. But when Matthew Stafford was on the field, that was a much better team than people realized. And I think that offense is only going to improve. They have a better run game, healthy fullback. They have DeAndre Swift, Kerryon Johnson, and now the same receiving core with TJ Hawkinson. I think that offense and team as a whole is going to be a lot better. So Marvin Jones is a good pick for where I got him in like the 6th or 7th round, I want to say. So you can't go wrong there. Then you move forward. You have the Patriots defense, a top defense in the NFL. So really just spots where I am happy where I got everyone. You know, it's just a good spot for everyone, I felt like. So I hope you guys enjoyed that fantasy football mock draft from the Draft Wizards. It is a good tool to do, and it's just a smart thing to do before your fantasy football draft, just to kind of get a sense of where certain guys are going, and it helps you prepare. Next time, maybe if you're not doing it in a podcast where how I want to talk to you guys about why I'm getting these players, you can put a clock on the mock draft, and it's really more real. You got to make these decisions quick. So it gives you that advantage of just kind of having your brain ready, of knowing where guys are going. So it's a tool that everyone should just do one or two before fantasy football season starts. So this was my first one. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know I had a great time telling you guys all this stuff. So hope you guys enjoyed it, and my mock draft 2.0 will be out in a couple weeks as we inch closer to the fantasy football season. Once teams start reporting, training camp starts, we will get to another one. But for now, I hope you guys got some good information, some good ideas of what's going on in a mock draft or in a fantasy football draft. So stick around after the break, and we will be talking about some more NFL news.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered. Listen, it's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back, people, and thank you for making it this far in the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed my first mock draft of the year. I felt like there was a lot of good information, kind of giving you certain players in certain rounds and why I value them there, maybe why I don't quite agree with drafting a player in certain spots, and just what I am looking for as it goes on in a fantasy football draft. Obviously, mock drafts aren't quite what real drafts are, especially in that one. I didn't have a time clock, but they are good exercises to run through before you get to your real fantasy football drafts. But now, finishing off the show, I want to talk about something that everyone knows about. It's the talk of the world right now. It's not the most fun thing to go into, especially as a sports fan in America, let's be honest, but that is the COVID-19 global pandemic going around. And there's a lot of things to unpack. I won't even get near even touching the surface on this, but I just want to give you a little bit of my thoughts, some things I have been reading and hearing. And it's just unbelievable that our country was so close to kind of getting under wraps, and now in certain parts of the country it is still in okay shape, but certain parts of the country it is completely came back with a vengeance. And now it's kind of just an interesting thing to think about with sports coming back. I mean, you have baseball and basketball. Basketball is kind of in their bubble in Orlando, starting to practice and getting ready to gear up for the end of July season that will take place, or tournament more so. And then baseball is in their training, kind of second spring training. The teams are training at their home stadium, so there's no inner squad. You're not playing other teams, aside from close teams. So like the San Francisco Giants will play the Oakland A's at the end of the spring training for 2 or 3 games. But other than that, there's no traveling. Everyone's stuck in that little bubble, which is what needs to be done. That is the right thing to do. And baseball, shockingly, had a 1.7% positivity rate, while basketball was much higher in like the 7 to 8 range. So there's just a lot of things to unpack here. I mean, players such as David Price have decided to opt out of the season, and that is something. There was a offensive lineman in the NFL. I'm not forgetting his name right now, but there's a couple players in the NFL that have voiced their concern. I don't know if anyone has quite said they're going to opt out, but don't be surprised when it gets closer. Guys who either are high risk, they have families that, they've already made their money and they just don't want to get their family sick. So there's a lot of things that go into making these decisions. And it's tough to say as a huge sports fan, someone who loves sports, it makes you wonder, is sports really what we should be doing right now? And I know people aren't going to agree with me on that, and it might make some people mad, but it's just the fact of the matter of what we're doing. Is this the right thing? Buster Posey of the San Francisco Giants opted out. He had a little bit of it, partly with, yes, the pandemic, but also because he just had, his family is adopting twins, and they were just prematurely born, so he doesn't want to risk any of that with the pandemic. But it was because of both things going on. But there's just a lot of things to unpack. The cases are rising, and now sports are coming back. And sports ended because cases were starting to pop up. So it's just this whole ordeal of very interesting. What is it going to take for leagues to stop at this point? Is it a widespread? A team can't play? It's a whole interesting thing to take a look at. And I hate to say it and be kind of the bearer of bad news, and I hope I am completely wrong, but personally, I don't think we make it through a full NFL season. I don't see that happening, if we're being quite frank. I just think that cases are not going anywhere. People are around each other. Football is a physical sport. There's no getting around that. So it's hard to stop a spread if it's going to happen. So I could really see this taking a huge toll on the NFL. And now an interesting tidbit that came out, the NFL is prohibiting the players to communicate, or after the game, they can't talk to players unless it's 6 feet. They can't exchange jerseys or anything. And Richard Sherman of the San Francisco 49ers put out a tweet that he has a point. He goes, so they want us to tackle everyone, be on top of each other, breathing on each other for 4 quarters, but then we can't say what's up at the end of the game. And I 100% get both sides. But on this one, the players have a point. Like, they are all over each other, hitting, tackling, sweating, spitting, and then at the end of the game, they can't give a handshake and say, what's up, good game. So I totally understand the league's point of trying to be safe as much as possible, but at that point, it's just kind of a head scratcher as to what they're going to do. And I mean, I think all leagues probably are, and I'm sure the NFL is preparing for every single scenario you could even imagine. But I mean, as this world has shown, it is a very unpredictable virus and very unpredictable world we are living in. So anything's really possible. And as much as I don't want to say it, it's hard to prepare for something like this. So I just kind of wanted to come on here and give my 2 cents of kind of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this could play into your fantasy football drafts. We'll bring it back into the topic of this podcast, because I did just kind of go on a little rant right there. But if we're looking at the topic of this podcast, the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, this could affect your fantasy team because it's almost inevitable that players are going to get sick. And who knows the severity of this virus, if they're going to be out a week, 3 weeks, 6 weeks. There's just so much unknown about this virus that you really don't know. And yes, they say, in shape athletes, they're going to be fine, but that's not always the case. Like that, we really don't know. So as you go into your fantasy football drafts, you have to kind of imagine what happens if this person gets sick. Is my depth ready to put something up? There's going to be a lot of younger guys who might be sprung into action that teams are trying to develop, but someone gets sick and they need a body to play. So there's little things like that to take into consideration as you draft your fantasy football team. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier, I even thought it when I was doing the draft, but I didn't say, one of the reasons I went Ezekiel Elliott in the first round is he had it. he had the coronavirus a couple weeks ago, so he has some sort, maybe not long lasting forever, but he has some sort of immunity. And so those type of things can come in advantage when he doesn't have to stress about it as much as other players do. And he can kind of feel good about how he's going about his business and just focus on football. So that's an advantage for a certain player. Obviously not everyone, but that's one thing to take into consideration when you are drafting at the top of the draft. If Ezekiel Elliott's there, that's one thing I did. And it's just the nature of the beast with what we are dealing with. You have to really consider all avenues when looking at your fantasy draft because of what's going on. So it's not fun. No one wants to do it, but do we have a choice? No, we don't. All right, that's it. I'm sorry. I had to get almost a little bit off my chest. You know, there's a lot of things going on in the world, a lot of things to unpack as we look at the scenarios for the upcoming NFL season. And not a conversation we want to have, but it's a conversation that is needed to be had. So you got to think outside the box when you're doing your fantasy football draft because of this COVID-19 pandemic. But hey, I appreciate you guys making it this far. Thank you so much for listening to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am Grady Duggan, your Thursday and Sunday host. And if you guys have the chance, I'd like to please ask if you could remember to subscribe to the show, write a review under. That really, really helps us out. And if you are on social media, go ahead and check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Again, thank you guys so much and have a great rest of your day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.